Let me go ahead and start with the bombshell. I like to start off that way because A, it convinces people to not watch the video, and B, it tends to get people in the right mindset to hear my explanation and decide whether they agree or not. I like this game better than X4. Also, this game reviewed better than X4. Barely. By 0.04 on the golden number. Which is ridiculous, but there we are. Okay, now that everyone's left, and now that I'm just talking to myself in an empty room, I can relax a little bit and try to talk out the whys and the wherefores. I've told this story a little bit before, but in case you're new or in case you haven't heard it or whatever, there's a period of my life where I had my computer and my PlayStation 1, and that was my gaming opportunity, right? It was having an itch on my lip from my mustache. The weird things they don't tell you about having a mustache. I had Mega Man 8, Mega Man X4, X5, X6. I had Breath of Fire 3, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9. And that was my library. And for, I want to say about 2 years, a little under 2 years, that's what I played. Other than Asheron's Call, which was on the PC, obviously. And that was my gaming, right? That was what I did, and that's how I hung out and blah, blah, blah. Anything else, like the PS2, because the PS2 was out at this point in time, that was my friend's. He owned that, so I didn't actually own a PS2. So if I wanted to play on the PS2, like Kingdom Hearts 1 or anything like that, which had been out for a few years at this point, I had to go borrow his copy, which I did periodically, but you get the point. Now, the reason I'm giving you this whole story is I wanted to share my mentality here, if you don't mind. Because I've told you before about how I used to replay Mega Man 7 all the time, and Mega Man X3, and they sucked. When I went back through them with analysis mode on, it became very clear how much they sucked. So I was kind of worried about this, because of the 4 Mega Man games I had access to, X5 was the one I replayed the most. In fact, I used to replay this all the time. Not only were there the other options and modes to go through to get the different parts, or to get 100%, or to speedrun it, or to play 0 or X, whatever, but this was right around when GameFAQs was starting to become a thing, and so I actually was able to look up a few things, like how exactly to get all the parts, for example. Anyways, I bring that up because my worry here, my mentality was, oh god, X5 is another game I used to replay all the time that is actually crap. But it wasn't that crap. And I do admit, that's a simplistic comparison, isn't it? After all, I replayed the heck out of FF6, and that's a perfectly good game. And you have to remember, I had access to 4 separate Mega Man games. Actually, if you want to think about it this way, I had access to 5 separate side-scrolling platformer games at this point in my life, between Castlevania as well as the 4 Mega Mans. And yet, Castlevania and Mega Man X5 are the 2 I chose to replay all the time. That probably means something, right? But I can look at this game and I can see exactly why I had that opinion then and why I have that opinion now. Here's the summary in case you don't want to hear the details. X5 does a lot right and a lot wrong. I've never formally come up with a lorium for this concept. It's something we've seen a few times in gaming, where there's a game that has a lot of positives and a lot of negatives. It's probably not that hard to conceive of the idea. I'm sure you could think of something right now off the top of your head with regards to movies or books or shows. Or games, where there's like, yes, and it's, god, but it's back to this, yes, and now it's this thing, right? Oftentimes these are games or movies or shows or books that try things and may or may not succeed at them. Oftentimes it's things that really go into a specific thing, like a specific niche or a specific concept, and so whether you're into it or not is going to depend on how much you like that niche and whether or not it's being done properly or blah, 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 blah. Sometimes it's a game like this, which had a lot of studio support and a lot of people throwing their weight into it. Huge number of people all collaborating for this game. This was the largest Mega Man production, second largest Mega Man production in terms of overall numbers until X8 came out, which actually had a fairly large production cycle too. Now this was still below X4 because everyone was working. They just threw so much into X4, as I've mentioned before. But there was a lot of people working on this one, and it's obvious to see why. X4, after all, sold really well. It sold under expectations, which naturally reduced the budget of this game, because that's how that works. But nevertheless, a lot of weight was still behind X5 in its production. And some people were already thinking about the Zero series. In fact, some people were already working on the Zero series. So there was some collaboration between 01 and their team and X5 and their team. So you can see how this whole thing kind of lined up. And then X6 came out. We'll get to that later. So for this game, it does so much right, and I love what it does right. I'm going to not give you the full list, although I tried to be as enumerable, that's totally a word, just trust me on this, as possible with regards to the details in the actual review. But this is the rumination, not the review. So I'm just going to cover a few of the things that I think that they did right, and then we'll cover what I think they did wrong. First of all, the number of choices in this game is through the roof. Wait, you want to just go ahead and skip to the end of the game? Done. You could just fire the Enigma Cannon right at the beginning of the game. You, in fact, have a 5% chance, a 1 in 20, of winning, of actually succeeding and blowing out the station. I've only seen that happen personally. I've only had that happen to me once. I've seen speedruns of this category, which is ridiculous, because what happens is the speedrunner plays through the intro stage, mashes through the text, fires the thing, waits for the cutscene, hits reset because it doesn't work, does the whole thing again. It's silly. But anyways. Yeah, RNG. We'll talk about RNG when it comes to the next game. My goodness. The point is, that's an option. Or you could fire it at any time you want to. Each additional point you get, each additional part you get, each stage you do, gives you a little bit more chance. Within reason. But that's the other thing. Some games, including Mega Man, actually, will do the thing where here's the 4 bosses. And that's it. You have to choose from the 4. Mega Man 7 did this. Mega Man 8 did this. And I feel like there's another one I can't think of right off the top of my head. But, here's the 4 bosses. Okay, you've beaten them. Here's the next 4 bosses. And 4, middle stage 4, has been a format for Mega Man for some time at this point in history. The format still holds true here, but the catch is, it's more like here's the 4, but you can go select these 4 if you want to. You don't have to, and you can get an item. You even get different dialogue. I don't know why you bothered to get that, but you can totally do that. Okay, we have a such and such now. I guess that's cool. We've kind of got a timer. Can we go? And you can just do them on whatever you want to, and do as many as you want to, and skip as many as you want to. Now, that's cool, and awesome, and fun. Catch. So this game, it kind of penalizes you in 2 separate ways for not playing in certain manners. Namely, for not leveling up the enemies before you defeat them, which allows you to get the parts, and for not focusing entirely on a single character. So let's say I get a heart up on 0. That heart up does not transfer to X. So if I get that, I have now nerfed my X comparatively. And so if I try to do a balanced playthrough, I am now screwed because it's not possible. By the way, this is such a weird design decision because this carries forward at least to X7 that I know of. Because X6 and X7 have the exact same mechanic and exact same limitation, which is just takes away so much of the point of having this kind of choose who you want to play as thing, right? What's funny is I know this is just a flag, a toggle flag, because there are mods that put it into the game, or perhaps more accurately, put it back into the game. So that's just whatever. I don't even know what's going on with that one. So you see what I mean? You can already see the pattern here, right? This is good, but ... Speaking of the parts themselves are awesome. There's wonderful stuff. You can make your shots go faster. You can give yourself more jump. Some of them, you can make it so that the viruses damage you less. You can make it so you can attack the viruses. You can power up your Mega Busters. There's all sorts of stuff. Some of them are for X, some of them for 0. All of them are cool. It's kit, as I like to use the term. It's something that helps flesh out how you play the game. Awesome. Hang on, it even gets better. Which form you use changes how many parts you can equip. This is cool in its own right. You might wonder, why does it even let you play as X without armor? Because you start the game with 4th armor. I'll come to that in a second. And 4th armor is 4th armor. It's still a very good armor, just like it was back in X4. Well, yeah, but 4th armor can only equip 2 item slots. It only has 2 part slots. Regular X, who has no armor, has 4. 0 has 3, which is kind of an in-between thing. The Gaia armor has 0. I forget how many Falcon has, but you get the idea, right? And so there's a little bit of a give and take. Well, you get this awesome armor, but you lose some of the parts as a consequence, and that's still awesome. Cool. How do you get parts? Well, I already hinted at this, but you get parts after you beat bosses. And those bosses have to be a certain level, which requires the timer to be at a certain time. And then afterwards, you may have played this game, and if you have, you may have seen it say, would you like the thing plus life up? Or thing plus energy up. Now what that does is it gives you either more maximum health or maximum weapon energy. which is also a cool concept. The thing is, which you pick determines which part you get, depending on the other variables. There's a table of which part you get based on all of these variables. It's not random in the strictest sense, but it could certainly look like it if you don't understand the formula. So getting parts sucks, but the parts themselves are awesome. What about the armors? The Falcon armor is just broken as hell, but also very, very fun to use. And honestly, I don't think it's over broken. I do think it is sufficiently limited as to still be just powerful, merely powerful. The Gaia armor is much more fun. Immunity to spikes, plus nice, big, powerful shots, which most people don't note this. The charge time on the Gaia armor is much shorter. So, as opposed to the more normal, which you get from the other armors, right? And of course, the Falcon armor's gun sucks because it's all about mobility and blah, blah. You get the idea. There's good kit here. It's great. It's just getting it sucks in various ways. I mentioned the 4th armor. I should talk about that. This is another one of those random things. You start the game with the 4th armor as X. That's an awesome idea, which frankly should have happened before now. X actually, or Mega Man, maintaining power-ups throughout the series. Like, I know we keep the dash, but that's about it, right? Unless you start the game as 0. If you play through the intro stage as 0, the 4th armor gets damaged and destroyed, and you don't have access to it anymore. What? Oh, it's okay. If you play the intro stage as X, 0 loses access to the Terra Buster. The Z Buster. I call it the Terra Buster because it's terrible. You have to stop while shooting, and it takes forever to do the shot, and it does very little damage. It's junk. So you can lose a junk gun which has very little utility, or you can lose the 4th armor. What? And you get my point. There are so many things like this. Let me give you another example. Zero himself plays, in my opinion, substantially better than an X4. He has a similar style of kit, but generally more. I don't want to say it's more utility. It's just his kit is wonderful and his moves are very intuitive. He has a nice moveset. His reach is better. He does more damage with the Z-Saber. Oh, check it out. The iframes are also different on his Z-Saber. If you've been paying attention to this series, you may remember I suggested that for X4. I will freely admit I forgot that X5 did that until I was replaying and I was like, oh, look, they took my suggestion. I reached into the past with my great powers to suggest. But that changes the combat in the exact same manner that I suggested it would back in X4. All of a sudden, the boss fights are like, it's all about the mobility. It makes Zero flow. And I do love that. I love playing as someone who is just this wonderful, smooth experience throughout the course of the game, whether it be regular enemies or bosses. And the whole game has this great flow to it. Oh, wait, no, we've got to have a negative. You know the pattern by now. Anything I say good about this game, I have to preface with an asterisk. Because X5 began the Alia interrupts. I think X6 makes them optional. I don't remember. Because I know X7 doesn't. When I say interrupts, I mean the game stops and lurches to an absolute freeze while his text box slowly pops up. And then she says the blindingly obvious. And then it goes away. And then at one point in time, there was literally an enemy who had shot at me and the bolt was coming. And I'm like in the middle of dodging. And then the Alia text box showed up saying, hey, there's an enemy coming up ahead. You should probably try to attack them with a weapon that can hurt them. Okay, thanks, Alia. Can I go now? I need to... Ugh! My reflexes were not ready. It's aggravating. Ignoring the fact that she tutorializes on the dumbest things. I mean, the dumbest things. Like, some of it makes sense. Hold up to grapple onto the thing. Okay, there's a logic to that. We might not know that. Some of them are things like, there's a door up ahead you need to shoot. You should shoot it. Okay. Hey, those spikes are going to drop down and they're going to attack you. Uh-huh. Hey, there's an enemy up ahead. Alia, I have eyes. Now, ironically, this would be, I talked about this with regards to ZX2. This would be smoothed out with voice acting that doesn't pause the game to play it. And this would be smoothed out if this was optional. If there was just a toggle that you could just put right at the beginning saying, I've never played a Mega Man game before. Because that's what this is. This is tutorialization for someone who has never played a Mega Man game of any kind before. And I'm okay with that level of tutorialization as long as it's optional. It's not. There's no skipping it. The only positive I could say about this is that once you run into a particular dialogue, it won't repeat. Even if you die and come back, it's like, yeah, you know how to deal with that spike wall by now, right? Some of the level designs are very creative and cool and fun. And then there's Duff McWhalen's stage. Some of the bosses are cool and fun and interesting. And then there's Duff McWhalen. I'm not trying to pick on him. It's just he's the worst. His attack is he's got a giant... So first of all, he does a really slow, boring attack, which is just kind of dumb in its own right. But then he's like, oh, okay, well, since you're tired of me being boring and dumb, you see that insta-kill spike wall? Well, I'm going to shove some spikes into you that throw you back into it. And I don't know if you've played a Mega Man game before, but you have limited mobility and speed when you're underwater. Now, there's ways to dodge that. In fact, you effectively have to be actively dodging before he tosses the spikes out. Or, excuse me, before he tosses the blocks out. Otherwise, you'll get stuck in the blocks and you'll do the wall glide thing. And you have a chance to get off that before it shoves you into the spikes, but not a good one. That sucks. But then there's some fun, interesting, and cool fights. Then there's the Shadow Devil fight. The Shadow Devil fight is terrible on almost every level. You have a non-stop repeating song that has about a 15-second loop playing for a fight that lasts for several minutes because of how much health... Oh, yeah, by the way, this whole game has a health sponge problem, but nowhere is it more serious than the Shadow Devil fight, because the fight takes forever. He has a very small weak point window, otherwise he's just invulnerable. And he hits like a truck, and he's down to rote memorization or using the wall trick. And then once you do that, he doesn't even start doing anything interesting until you get him to about half health down, which takes several minutes because of the aforementioned health problem. And this whole time you're hearing this 15-second loop going over and over and over and over. It is one of the worst bosses I've ever seen in the Mega Man franchise. Don't worry, we'll be seeing a worse one in the very next game. Mother Nightmare, cough, cough. And then there's the Zero X fight, which, despite being narratively one of the dumbest scenes in the entire game, is actually a really fun fight as both characters. Well designed, and obvious work and effort was put into making them do a bunch of stuff, and it's cool, right? But I suppose this is as good as any time to talk about the narrative, such as it is. We've talked before about mistranslation issues. I pointed out the wonderful, wonderful mistranslation of Zero, you're a maverick? ? In X4, or the translation issue at the ending of X3, but I think the localization is probably the worst I've seen so far in X5. It's that particular brand of bad localization that I don't actually see all that often, where the text on the screen, you can kind of infer what they're trying to say, but that's not English. That's not sentence structure. That's not word choice. That's just... okay. And it just kind of turns into a jumble of noise because it is just that not English, right? I have no idea how the dialogue is in Japanese, obviously. I'm assuming it's better, because that's usually how that goes. But I mentioned the narrative. X2 and 3 and 4 have all been building up to this point that X and Zero must fight. It's their destiny. Now, I've never bought this story point, and frankly, I think it's been excessively forced every time it's come up. Because consistently, despite the fact that they keep saying, we must fight for the future and we must fight for peace, I have seen no evidence of that fact. Zero is not inclined towards his maverick origins. He is not going maverick. He is not insistent upon descending to such a mentality. He is not persisting in allowing the maverick prize to expand throughout the world or anything. He's not doing anything. There's nothing about Zero that is causing these issues. And there's nothing about X that are causing these issues, so why is there this big destined fight between the two? This is what we call unearned. This is an unearned narrative point. This would even continue forward into the Zero series, but I've already talked about that. So, okay, fine. We must fight. And so they get together, and if you're playing as X or Zero, both times, it's the dumbest cutscene. The dialogue, I was reading out loud just so people would really appreciate and understand just how bad it is. I've decided... I care about you so much, but you might be Maverick. Oh, yeah? Well, maybe you're the one who's Maverick. Oh, no, you're right. I must honor you by fighting you. What? And the whole game has that problem, by the way. How many of you have ever read comic books? I guess I'll raise my hand on this one. I like comic books. There's a lot of good stuff there. But one of the things that's always pissed me off more than anything else in comic books is when they treat death cheaply and don't do it right. The second biggest thing that pisses me off in comic books is when they have a bad or non-excuse for two people to fight. Because we want to have a fight scene. So, hey, look, there's a cat that needs to be helped across the road. My gosh, you're right. We should go help that cat. Wait, I want to help that cat. No, I want to help that cat. How dare you insist that I can't help that cat? You couldn't help that cat if you wanted to. And then they fight. And what usually happens in comic books, this is hysterical, is as soon as the fight ends, they're like, okay, let's go help the cat across the road. Okay. And then they go help the cat across the road. That's a terrible example, but it's pretty much 1-to-1 of what happens in these moments. I don't know what that's actually called, but it's stupid. So anyways, Mega Man X5. Hey, we need this item. Yes, I should give you this item. It's very important. But as I'm giving you this item, I'm going to try to murder you. What? The excuses. Zero and X are actually that's not even me putting words with them. They are actually bloodthirsty in the English translation. They are eager to kill these people. Now, in some cases, it makes sense. They're already infested with the virus, like the Kraken, or, they already have a predisposed reason to hate us, like the Pegasus. But for the most part, it's just, why are we fighting? No X4 relation intended. Speaking of which, super quick, I've been using this as some of my behind-the-scenes material for this as we go. If you've been wondering, I've referenced it a couple of times. But there was this neat little thing here. So some of you probably remember in X5, when it first came out, they had different names than they do now. And I kind of liked them. I didn't get the Guns N' Roses reference. I wasn't a fan of them, so I didn't catch any of the reference there. But what I didn't know is they all have titles, too. So Crescent Grizzly is actually Grizzly Slash, the Wild Iron Claw. Volt Kraken is actually Squid Adler, the Super Magnetic Trap. Shining Firefly is Izzy Glow, the Spark of Intelligence. Tidal Whale is Duff McWhalen, the Guardian of the Great Sea. Spiral Pegasus is the Skiver, Air Force Prince. Spike Rosa Red is Axel the Red, the True Crimson Illusionist. Burn Dinorex is Matrex, the Jurassic Inferno. And Dark Necrobat is the Dark Dizzy, Forgotten Warrior of Shadow. I just thought that was cool. I wanted to share that. Apparently, they all have titles from this point on. I think I saw that for X6, too. So I'll be sharing those when we get to X6 as well. Gates' title is The Moron. Oh, nope, the X6 don't have titles. Holy crap. Do the X7 have titles? They do. Why does X7 have titles? So we have a bunch of dumb reasons for us to fight. Okay, cool. We need boss fights. Fine. Whatever. So the narrative sucks on that front. But it's kind of cool in other ways. And again, this goes back to that positives negative thing. For every dumb fight we have for no good reason, the actual premise is legit. In fact, this is actually my favorite plot of the X series thus far, of 1 through 5. So Sigma has distributed a virus throughout the world. Now, we could probably handle with that to some extent or other, but that's a distraction. That's noise. That's interfering with our ability to react to stuff. While this is happening, he takes the space colony Eurasia, which is one of the only remaining colonies that's left still damaged after the Repliforce War in 4, and sends it on a careening collision course with the Earth. Now, Eurasia, I've mentioned this a few times because this came up so much in the Zero series and arguably in the ZX series as well. The Eurasia is huge. This is an entire massive arcology, so its impact is a global extinction level event if it smashes in, right? This is going to be a big deal. So this thing's coming down, and our ability to deal with it is reduced. And so we've got a genuine plot with a genuine threat and a genuine ticking clock that all makes sense. And the mission structure and the military vibe of the whole thing actually fits really well, I think. It even makes sense for why we're going after these 4 specific people. They're not even Mavericks at this point. It's just we're going after 4 dudes who happen to have the parts that will help us to power up our shots at this thing. And we can fire at any time. That's the choice thing I mentioned earlier. But we want to try as best as we can. The other cool thing about this, there's 3 endings for this game. There's actually like 5, but let's not get into that. There's 3 important endings to this game. Now, I know they don't fit 100%, but what I find interesting is that what was almost assuredly unintended is that each of them leads into the rest of the franchise. With the X ending where Zero is erased, So this is the ending in which Zero, so we don't defeat the colony. We play as X, we go through. X, Dr. Light's cyber elf removes all of the memories of Zero from X. And so X gets this whole dream about building this new race, this new thing for all the people, carbons, and he's going to call it Elysium. That leads straight into Mega Man Legends. I mean, straight, it's a few millennia out, but that leads into Mega Man Legends, right? Okay. And it's a very overt reference, too. Then we've got the ending where the thing collides with the planet and the Earth barely survives. Like 98% of the population is wiped out. Everything's gone to hell. And we barely managed to defeat Sigma, but Sigma's removed to the board. Zero goes into stasis to be able to be processed for the future. Everything's cool. That leads into the Zero series. And then we've got the ending where Zero is like badly mangled and badly damaged. Everyone thinks he's going to die. But X manages to survive, thanks to Dr. Light again. And we're going to have to do the best we can in order to salvage the Earth for for Zero. Now, it will fight on in Zero's memory, and that leads directly into X6. I'm pretty sure that's kind of a completely unintentional pseudo-retcon kind of a thing. But it is interesting to think about. The other thing I wanted to talk about, other than the fact that Sigma continues to not be a character, is the fact that Dr. Wily has more character in this game than Sigma does. And Dr. Wily is arguably not in this game. This is the most overt the references to Dr. Wily get. There's a picture of him straight out of Mega Man 8. They constantly refer to him as either the professor or the doctor. Zero has a lengthy conversation with Dr. Light about Dr. Wily. Sigma flat out talks to Zero about Dr. Wily. Sigma flat out talks to X about Dr. Wily. They never name drop him. That's the one thing they never do. But it's him. It's literally a picture of him. For God's sakes, we see the W when we're fighting the Shadow Devil. It's him. So, this is the most overt that ever gets, and they never really went anywhere with it. I always kind of vaguely wondered where they were going with all this. Unfortunately, the most likely answer there is they were going to turn him into Dr. Vile. As I've already discussed, Dr. Vile was originally Dr. Wily, so that's probably what the original intent was, which sucks because Dr. Vile is stupid and terrible, and not Dr. Wily. I hope you've enjoyed this reference to Dr. Wily. This is the last one we're getting. He will not show up or even be hinted at or referenced in the future, not counting ZX2. So that's cool. But the other thing, we always have these refights in the Mega Man games, right? We always have these bits where it's like, hey, we need to fight the 8 bosses again. Why? Now, I know that there are people who disagree with me on this. I've always found the boss refights to be bad. And the main reason why is because they're lazy. It's the exact same fight. In most cases, it's literally the exact same fight. X5 is particularly bad about this, because when we fight Duff McWhalen in cyberspace, it's underwater with a giant wall of spikes over there. Or when we fight Grizzly Slash, there's chunks of just the Earth against the backdrop of the internet. It's just really distracting and awkward looking. It's so lazy, because it's just padded content at that point. There are ways to do this to vary it up, make it more interesting, kind of change the format of it, maybe make it a boss rush like we did in Shovel Knight, maybe make it so the fight operates a little bit differently. But what they do in X5 is they give them a whole lot more HP, which is funny because they do the same thing in X6. But I wanted to talk about something with regards to that, because this might be one of the only Mega Man games where the refights make a small amount of sense in lore. Hear me out for 1 second. The Zero series establishes rather strongly that the cyberspace, what they refer to as cyberspace, that's probably a bit of a mistranslation, is the afterlife. It is the cybernetic afterlife for Reploids and other AIs and constructs. Now, on the face of it, that's just kind of, okay, what? But here's the thing. I mentioned this when I started streaming X5. X5 is when the series started becoming a fantasy series instead of a sci-fi series. Now, I've pointed out before, that was always the intention. Remember, I mentioned all the way back in X1, the original intent was for Sigma to have a soul. And then that was going to be something that carried forward. Souls are mentioned again when it comes to X6, I think. It might have been here. But either way, they always wanted to go more into the mystical, the fantastical, the fantasy concept. We had a long discussion about this on stream, so I'm not going to bore you with it now. But the general idea is the difference between fantasy and sci-fi is tone. you can have fantasy, which has mechanical constructs and robots and all that, and you can have science fiction, which has magic and spells and superpowers. The difference is entirely about the tone and how you use what and why. The Mega Man series, up until now, in my opinion, has always been a sci-fi series. As of X5, and this continues into the Zero series, the Zeros and the ZXs are all fantasy games. X5 and X6 are all very definitively fantasy games. I'm not sure about X7 or X8. We'll get there. But anyways, I don't have that strong of memories of them about the tone of the narrative, so like I said, we'll get there. But that's fine. That's not necessarily a negative. It's a bit of a jarring shift, because it really does just all of a sudden be, you can't analyze him like regular data. You have to feel where he is, and I must use my DNA to merge my soul with this thing, whatever. But the reason this is relevant is because of this cyberspace thing. Because this is the afterlife. Again, that's established in the Zero series rather conclusively. This is where they go after they die. And on the face of it, that makes a degree of sense in its own weird way. After all, in most settings when there's an afterlife, there's just kind of a rule. A rules magic is what I always refer to this, if then. So if someone dies, their soul gets picked up and they get dropped off over in this particular afterlife. In many fictional settings, like Faerun, for example, or the Forgotten Realms if you prefer, there's like an attachment. So you died, but you were a follower of this person, so you go here. Or maybe you go here to be judged, and then you get sent to where you want to go. Elder Scrolls follows the same concept. Where you go after you die is dependent on the effects and the enchantments, the leadership, the allegiance, the ownership of your soul. So there's some kind of filter sort function for these biological creatures for where they go. So it's not that out of bounds to say that there's a similar sort function for artificial creatures, to say that, okay, well, you have now died, so you go down to the cyberspace, right? And they just automatically go there, just like biological creatures automatically go on to heaven, hell, or the mountains of Elysium, or whatever, right? There's a logic to that. It's also shown in this game because the first stage we have here is now, obviously this is all done for out-of-character reasons. They wanted to show an homage to classic Mega Man, so they had the Quick Man stage and the Devil Boss. They wanted the homage to the X series, so they had the X1 Sigma 1 stage and then the fight with the Rangabanga. But there's still a logic to these things being stuck in the afterlife because they're dead, they're gone, they're destroyed, and this is where they ended up. Also, and this is actually further mentioned in X6, we do know that the massive impact here and the sheer density of the amount of virus, because that makes sense, allowed for what is effectively a crack in reality. We see this as we enter the stage. There's this giant pit, and the further down you get, the more you get into pure energy. The simplest way to explain this for anybody who's played D&D is this is the astral plane. It's right alongside, right? Astral's probably not a good example, actually, but whatever. It's a conducive. It's a side dimension. Rather than a pocket dimension or a separate dimension like an outer plane, it's right alongside the prime material plane, and the two can blend over and meet over depending on circumstances. The Eurasia slamming into the planet was such a devastating and horrifying attack on such a scale that it had not been seen before, and it was a cybernetic thing that it smashed that barrier there, and now we have bits of cyberspace literally leaking into the material plane, right? So we can physically enter the cyberspace, see all these dead creatures, and of course that's where Wily's been hanging out. Along with the pod for both X and Zero, which is awesome, by the way. I give a plus just for this because it's such brilliant storytelling. I mentioned earlier, you probably heard this, and you're thinking, oh, he just forgot to explain that. No. Wily has more characterization in one screen than Sigma does in all his lines of dialogue. Because we see Wily's obsession. There's a circuit board in the background, which I almost guarantee you is what Wily or Wily's fork or whatever's left of him is in, that he's inside that circuitry. And he has grabbed the pod of Zero, the physical representation of himself and all that he's worked to accomplish, and he's grabbed the pod of X, the physical representation of Dr. Light, his great nemesis, whose rivalry gives him motivation in life. And he's got those two outlines of X and Zero and what that represents and what that means. And just there's so much implication just in the backdrop. And then we fight Sigma. The Sigma fights suck, by the way, to continue the positive-negative thing. That's just how it works in this game. There's good and then there's bad. But the idea of entering into this cyberspace, and this cyberspace, the afterlife, hell, or whatever. It's not actually a bad after, so I don't want to say hell. Leaking out and causing issues is not exactly untoward or uncommon when it comes to a fantasy work, and we'll be seeing more of that in X6. Either way, this has been a fascinating game to go through. In all sincerity, my initial statement stands full. I do think this is a better game than X4. In fact, I think this is probably my third favorite of the X games, give or take, upon replay. And it's one I hope to replay in the future, because it's just fun. Oh, and to further add to that, it's fun to play as X or Zero, which is something I can't say for several games we're about to be covering. Tomorrow we play X6.